All right, thank you for tuning in. Our study today will be talking about the first period of retirement, and in that, heading or subject matter, we'll be discussing the return of the 12. Jesus seeks some rest and the feeding of the 5,000, and then we'll talk about Jesus withdrawing to a mountain to escape being made king by the people. Jesus walks on the water, the reception he gets at Gennesaret, and when we'll talk about how the crowds begin to turn back or turn away from Jesus. And then we'll talk about the Pharisees coming up from Jerusalem to criticize Jesus. All right, let's talk about returning of the 12 apostles. That was the return from their limited commission. Jesus seeking some rest and the feeding of the 5,000. That's found in Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 44, Matthew 14, 13 through 21, Luke chapter 9, verses 10 through 17, and also John 6, 1 through 14. We're going to be reading from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. Let's read together. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all the things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. And they arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he had come out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. And so he began to teach them many things. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that we may go into the surrounding country and villages to buy themselves bread." And they have nothing to eat. Verse 37, for he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." But they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And they found out that they had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, hundreds and in fifties. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. And so they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of fish. Verse 44. And now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. Well, we see the apostles returning to Jesus and reporting back to him all the things that they had done, the teachings and the healings, the casting out demons, all those things of authority that he had given to them. They were coming back and reporting to him all the good works they had done. And Jesus told them that they needed to come in and rest for a while. They had been working hard for him and working hard for the kingdom, and it was, time for rest, which is, typical of hard work. Your body needs to rest and relax for a little bit. And so they departed out in a boat, but the multitudes saw the direction they were going, and they got there before them, didn't they? They ran and came out, and Jesus was moved with compassion for these people. They were just large crowds, but they were out like sheep without a shepherd. And so Jesus spent most of the day teaching them, didn't he? And when it got late in the day, his disciples said, "We need to send these folks away so they can get something to eat." And Jesus said we should feed them, right? You give them something to eat, he said. And they were a little perplexed by that. And so they searched around, and they ended up with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And John's account says that they found a lad with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, some young boy that had this meal. And so you could imagine the apostles were in wonderment what was going to happen. But as they divided up in ranks, some accounts say 50s, and Mark's account says in groups of hundreds and groups of 50s. And Jesus gave thanks, broke up the bread and the fish, and passed them out, and kept passing out and dividing up. And they ended up, after everyone was filled, that they took up 12 baskets full of fragments, leftovers, in other words. And just the men alone numbered 5,000, and that is some kind of miracle that they had witnessed. And they had witnessed many miracles so far. Jesus is just giving them another example that he is the Son of God. At this point, Jesus' popularity is really, really big at this time. Just everywhere he goes, there are people who are just crowding him and thronging him, following him everywhere he goes. And they are really looking to Jesus to be their everything. And so much fact, and so when we get over to the next study here, Jesus withdraws to a mountain to escape being made king over in, we're going to read, this is found now in John 6, verse 15, Matthew 14, 22 to 23, and then Mark 6, 45 through 46. And we're going to read the first that verse in John, and then over in Matthew. And his popularity was so much so that the people wanted him to be their physical leader, but that was not what Jesus had come for. And so we see there's a little misunderstanding between the people and what Jesus is doing here, his mission. All right, let's read John chapter 6, verse 15. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself to be alone. We also find out, if we read Matthew 14, 22 to 23, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him on the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now evening had come, he was alone there. And we see in John's account that he had removed himself because he knew what the people were beginning to want. And in Matthew's account, we also see Jesus moving himself alone to the mountain so he could pray to God. And that was Jesus' practice a lot. He would go by himself and talk with God, pour out his heart, ask his Father to, for whatever blessing or whatever guidance he needed, or anything he needed, he would talk to God. And it's just another great example to us that we should spend time alone talking to God. Now, while he was alone on the mountain, remember, his disciples had gotten into the boat. And this is where we see our next scene coming up. Jesus walking on the water. That's found in Matthew 14, 24 through 33, Mark 6, 47 through 52, and John 6, 16 through 21. And we're going to read from Matthew's account. All right, verse 24, Matthew 14. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And so he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. He began to sink and cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased. And those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, Truly, you are the Son of God. All right, while we know Jesus is up on the mountain and the disciples have gotten into the boat, he can see what's going on. In fact, Mark's account says that he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. And this would be the fourth watch of the night that we read in Matthew, there 25, verse 25. I think would have been around 3 a.m. to daylight, 3 to 6 roughly. I believe that was the fourth watch of the night. And that's when Jesus came walking on the sea. And of course they were scared. They thought they had seen a ghost. And he told them, don't be afraid, it's me. Be of good cheer. And that would have been a rejoicing thing to see the Savior coming, because he could, really, calm the situation that they were in. And of all the good things they had seen him do, they should have been ready and been glad he was there. And Peter, we find out, see Peter is, I guess just being Peter, he's, one of these first to act type people. And he calls out to Jesus and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come on the water. And so Jesus told him, come on. So Peter jumped out of the boat, was walking on the water. And then he got distracted, didn't he? He saw that the wind was boisterous. And I imagine that would make the waves too pretty big. And he began to be afraid, didn't he, and sink. And he cried out to Jesus to save him, which was a good thing. That's what we need to do. Trust and lean on the Lord for salvation. And so Jesus stretched out his hand and asked him and saved him, caught him and asked him, why did he doubt? Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? So when they got in the boat, the wind had ceased. And of course his apostles there worshiped him, that he was the Son of God. Which it's interesting, all the good things that they have done, and this is his second demonstration of his power over the elements. And they're, and now they're saying he's the Son of God. But it makes you wonder how many things that they had to see to really profess that conclusion. Mark's account in Mark chapter 6 said they had not understood about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. So this may have been this whole scene that Jesus may have. We had this point so Jesus could again try to teach them and show them that he was God's Son. Interesting fact there in John chapter 6 verse 21, when they got into the boat, it says immediately the boat was at land where they were going. So that would have been another miracle within itself. And that's just kind of a neat detail there with John. And we find out from Mark's account that they were going toward Gennesaret, which would have been on the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee. And we can find this account in Mark 6:53 through 56, and also Matthew 14:34 through 36. And we're going to read from Mark's account. Mark 6:53 through 56. And when they had crossed over, they came to the land of the Gennesaret and anchored there. And when they had come out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through the whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick on the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched him were made well. Again, we see that the popularity of Jesus is just really, really big right now. Everywhere he goes, people recognize him, and here they come with their sick and afflicted, those who need healing, those who need Jesus, and they are just laying them out all through the marketplaces, wherever they can find a spot to put them, I would imagine, and just sought Jesus to heal him, and maybe even as the woman did in the crowd, just touch the hem of his garment, that they could be made whole. And of course, that was the case; they could be made whole, and that was their faith that made them whole, and of course, Jesus' willingness. As popular as Jesus is at this point, we are going to read about how the crowds began to turn back, and that's found over in John chapter 6, 22 through 71. And here we're going to see Jesus challenge the people a little bit tougher, uh, and we're going to see their reaction. So let's begin to read there. John 6, 22 through 71. And on the following day, when the people who were standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except the one which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they had ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. And when the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into boats and came to Capernaum, seeking Jesus. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Jesus answered them and said, Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for food which perishes, but for food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. And then they said to him, What shall we do that we may work the works of God? And Jesus answered and said to them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he sent. Therefore they said to him, What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you true bread, the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I say to you that you have seen me, and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that all he has given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. And then the Jews complained about him, because he said, I am the bread which comes down from heaven. And they said, Is not this Jesus the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it that he said, I have come down from heaven? And Jesus answered and said to them, Do not murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And I will raise him up in the last day. And it is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught by God. Therefore everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which comes down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. The Jews therefore quarreled among themselves, saying, How can this man give us his flesh to eat? And Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up in the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him, as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father. So he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which has come down from heaven, not as your fathers ate manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. And then these things, excuse me, these things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. And therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, say, This is a hard saying. Who can understand it? And when Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, Does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life. But there are some among you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe, and who would betray him. And he said, Therefore I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted to him by the Father. And from that time many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. And Jesus said to the 12, Do you also want to go away? But Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who betrayed him, being one of the 12. All right, we see the scene here that Jesus has, of course, he went to Gennesaret, and now he's over in Capernaum, and the people are seeking him and find him there in Capernaum. And Jesus calls them out. You're not challenges them that you're not following me because of the miracles I'm doing, and that he was the Son of God, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. There, verse 26. And he encourages them that they should work or labor for food which does not perish, which endures to everlasting life. And so they asked about this. Well, what do we need to do that we can do the works of God? And he tells them, you need to believe in me, believe in him who had sent him. And then they ask a real strange question. Well, what sign are you going to show us? We ate manna from the desert. For it's written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. And really, they're kind of issuing a statement that you should feed us. God gave us bread in the wilderness, gave our ancestors bread in the wilderness, and you should do that too. That's almost what they're saying to Jesus here. And they're asking him, well, what kind of sign are you going to give us to show it that you're from heaven, which is really a strange question. He'd been doing all kinds of miracles and healing the sick, and they should have known by now who he really was. And he agrees with them that God did give them bread, but now they have a true bread from heaven, and which would have been him. And then, of course, they asked for that. Give us this bread always, because the bread that they got through Jesus was the life of the world. And they said, well, just go ahead and give it to us all then. And he proclaims to them again that he was the bread of life, and that those who followed him would not hunger or thirst. While Jesus again says that he is the bread of life, and those who come after him would never hunger or thirst, he also tells them, you've seen me, but you don't believe. And then he tells them it was part of God's plan that everyone that believed in God would believe in Jesus, would have everlasting life, and then he would raise them up in the last day to everlasting life. And then what did the people do? Well, they started complaining. Again, much like in his hometown of Nazareth, they said, hey, wait a minute, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph? We know, they knew his mother and father. And they're asking, well, how did this guy come down from heaven? They didn't fully believe that he was God's son, did they? Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he answered them, y'all don't need to be complaining amongst yourselves. God is going to be teaching you like in the prophets, you should be taught by God. He says nobody's seen God except who's been with him, which was Jesus, and that he came down from heaven, and that he was the bread of life, and those who partook of him and would be have everlasting life. And that was his purpose, to come to earth to be a sacrifice for the sins of the world. And of course, they wanted to argue about it. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? They said they did not understand what he meant by that. Now, Jesus says something to them here that's on the surface very tough. And it was tough for these people to comprehend. He said pretty much, yeah, that's right. Unless you eat the flesh and drink my blood, you'll have no life in me. Now, Jesus' purpose was to come and be a sacrifice, right? He would give of himself as a sacrifice on the cross. His blood would flow on the cross. And it's in that, accepting that for salvation's sake, that would save them. Remember, they had been talking about manna. The people said manna saved our ancestors. And this is Jesus saying that his sacrifice was going to be saving them. But they had to accept that. They had to partake in that sacrifice and be willing to follow after him. He says, not as he was the bread that came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate manna and are now dead, but he who eats the bread of life would live forever. And what the people had a hard time. They said that who is understanding that, and they complained more, didn't they? They complained more. Jesus also tells them again that he is from God. He's from the Spirit, and the Spirit gives life. And the words that he was speaking to them are spirit, and they are life. And so, and that was from God. It was God's gift to them. And many people did not want to follow him. He told them, but some of you do not believe. And we see this, and we talked about it before, that there was going to be, kind of a hard and fast line. They were going to believe or not believe. And now some of the people who were coming for their physical needs to be taken care of didn't really care about the spiritual needs, or maybe even some people that were just kind of out sightseeing and seeing the wonders of Jesus, who weren't really sure what to think, were now putting themselves in the category of non-believers, and they went back and didn't walk with him anymore. And so Jesus asked the 12, "Are you going to leave too? Do you also want to go away?" And Simon Peter makes a great statement that we need to have as part of our life. Who else are we going to go to? You have the words of eternal life, and so there's nothing in this world that's going to save us other than Jesus and accepting His sacrifice, becoming a Christian, following His word, and that's it. You can't get to heaven without Christ, without believing in Him. And He professes that we've come to believe it and know you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus kind of makes a statement alluding to one of the 12, which would have been Judas, was going to betray Him. One of you is a devil, He said. All right, our next scene we're going to talk about, was the Pharisees coming up from Jerusalem to criticize Jesus. And this is found in Mark 7, 1 through 23, Matthew 15, 1 through 20, and also John chapter 7 and verse 1. All right, let's read from Mark 7, 1 through 23. And then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem. Now when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews who did not eat unless they washed their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. And when they had come from the marketplace, they did not eat unless they washed. And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. And then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why do your disciples not walk according to the traditions of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? And he answered and said to them, Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, and it is written, This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandments of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do. And he said to them, All too well you reject the commandments of God, that you may keep your traditions. For Moses said, Honor your father and mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, If a man says to his mother or father, Whatever profit you might have received from me is Corban, that is a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother, making the word of God of no effect through your traditions which you have handed down. And many such things you do. And when he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, Hear me, everyone, and understand there is nothing that enters a man from the outside which can defile him, but the things that come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears, let him hear. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. And he said to them, Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from the outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, and thus purifying all foods? And he said, What comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of man, proceeds evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. Also at the end of Matthew's account, he also says, that we could see there in verse 20, These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Also at the verse 1 of John 7, after these things Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill him. And that was from the Jews. Remember, they came up, as we began to read, they came up from Jerusalem trying to find fault in him. They were trying to find an accusation against him so they could kill him. All right, we see that when the Pharisees came up, they had found the fault they found with Jesus was that the disciples did not wash their hands in the proper steps that the Pharisees had come up with. Remember, we talked about several times that the Pharisees had a lot of little rules on how to keep the law of God. And in this case, there was a special way that they was to wash their hands, a certain method, and before they ate. And they had all kinds of, you procedures for cups and pitchers and vessels, these sort of things. And the Pharisees wanted to know what was the problem with the keeping of the traditions of the elders. And Jesus pointed out to them pretty quick that while they were hypocrites, and while they tried to honor him with their lips, that their hearts were more on the doctrine of their own teachings, and their commandments of men they would promote as eternal doctrines. And they lay aside the commandments of God, what was really important, and held to themselves. And he gives an example about this honoring their father and mother, and how they were supposed to care for their father and mother when they had need. But if the people would put money into the temple treasury, then they could get away from taking care of their parents. That would be okay if they gave it to God. It's a gift to God. My money is Corban, and so the parents would be, in a tough spot, and that would have been a handed down tradition. While God's commandment says they were to honor their father and mother. But it's almost as if they were, I guess taking. It's almost like a bribe, I guess, not to get away with not caring for your parents if you give us a little money into the treasury. And he was calling the multitude there to let them know, the folks that were still with him. A lot had left, and he basically tells them it's not the outside, the washing, that defiles a person. Eating with unclean hands isn't the point. It's what comes out of your mind or your heart that defiles you. And he even made that clear to the disciples when they asked, "Well, what did you mean by that? What was this parable about?" And he was, pretty stern with them there. Now, you don't get it either? Are you not understanding what I'm saying too? It's what comes out of the heart of people. And he gives a list of things we need to, stay from, that, because that's what defiles people: evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetous, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye. That's an interesting comment there. An evil eye, pride, and foolishness are in the same list of adulteries and fornications and murders, or things we think of are really bad things, but so is pride and foolishness, an evil eye. All these things are evil things, and they come out, and that's what defiles a person. And Jesus said, I like Matthew's account, that he reiterates, eating with unwashed hands does not defile a person. Now, they did not keep the tradition of the elders that they had made, the traditional commandments. But Jesus warns them to be mindful of more spiritual things of your conduct. That's what made you defiled you as being a bad person, an evil person. Alrighty, in our study today, we have seen through the first period of retirements how the 12 apostles returned back to Jesus after the limited commission and reported back their teachings and their miracles that they had performed. And we see Jesus seeking rest, trying to get a little break there, and he had compassion on his people, his creation, by feeding the 5,000. And then he knows that they're going to try to make him a physical king, which was not his intent or his purpose at all. And so he kind of withdraws to the mountain from that, seeing his disciples struggling on the water as they're trying to cross the Sea of Galilee. He walks on the water to them. And then we see his reception at Gennesaret on the northwestern side of the Sea of Galilee, how the people just came flocking and bringing all their sick, just even if they could just touch the hem of the garment, they would be made well. And also we see how the crowds followed Jesus, not for spiritual feeding, but for the physical needs that he could provide after the feeding of the 5,000. And Jesus had told them that they really needed to be into him and into his teaching, and accepting that his purpose was to be a sacrifice of giving his body and blood, and that's what they needed to concentrate on, to accept, and to partake in. And that really turned off a lot of people. And then we see the Pharisees coming up from Jerusalem. And these periods of retirement are going to be places now that he's starting to avoid because of the big turn back from the crowds and the criticism of the Pharisees trying to plot to kill Jesus. And that's what we're going to see, these periods of retirement where he avoids those areas. All right, we'll study our second period of retirement on our next study. Thank you for tuning in, and let's continue to pray for one another